What's up, everybody? Welcome to segment 2 of the Thomas Take today, December 5th, 2016. I can't believe how fast this year has gone over the course of this year. I remember starting this podcast in January of 2016, and it's been pretty awesome. I'm really enjoying it. I wanted to do more during the football season, but work and other things, agreements kind of kept me out of the way from doing stuff with the podcast more. But definitely, when the playoffs come and things like that, expect guests and more people to be on this podcast like there has been as of recently. So today it's just me on the mic. Once again, I'm the host, Ryan Thomas. This is the Thomas Take Sports Podcast. And if you have not listened to the first segment of today's show, check it out. I talked about the Buffalo Bills, Week 13 post-game reaction, and kind of a look into the future as far as what needs to happen in order for the Buffalo Bills to become that playoff team that the Buffalo Bills fans deserve to see. So, that being said, this is my preview to UFC 206, Max Holloway versus Anthony Pettis in the main event of the evening. I'm very excited for this fight. Obviously, the original main event was Daniel Cormier versus Anthony Rumble Johnson for the UFC light heavyweight title. The co-main event was originally a 3-round fight between Max Holloway and Anthony Pettis. That fight was promoted, moved up to the main event, and made for the interim featherweight championship. But wait, there was already an interim title fight for the featherweight division back at UFC 200 between Jose Aldo and Frankie Edgar when Conor McGregor was the UFC featherweight champ. Fast forward now to December, Conor McGregor wins the belt off of Eddie Alvarez at lightweight in November at UFC 205, first event in MSG. Then, 18 days later, Conor McGregor is stripped of his featherweight belt. Jose Aldo is promoted as the UFC featherweight champion from the interim to the featherweight champion. And then Daniel Cormier was injured, and they promoted Max Holloway and Anthony Pettis as that main event for the interim UFC featherweight title. The winner between Max Holloway and Anthony Pettis will now fight the featherweight champion Jose Aldo for the UFC featherweight belt. So Conor McGregor is no longer the UFC featherweight champion. After a year of not defending his belt, experimenting in the welterweight division with Nate Diaz, experimenting in the lightweight division with Eddie Alvarez, and taking that title, Conor McGregor is no longer the UFC featherweight champion. So there's a lot to take in there. Initially, I was pretty surprised that they took his belt away. I was actually happy that they took his belt away because I said dating back to December of 2015 when he knocked out Jose Aldo, when Conor McGregor knocked out Jose Aldo in 13 seconds, I said that Conor McGregor would never fight in the UFC featherweight division ever again. The 13-second knockout over Jose Aldo, a fight that was 2-3 years in the making, you can't get much better than that to win the belt. I didn't think he'd experiment defending the belt because he had problems making weight for that weight class. 155 is more of a natural fit for Conor McGregor going forward. So now Conor is at 155. Now he is the champion at 155 only. Conor McGregor, UFC lightweight champion. And Conor is going to be taking a break for a little while due to the birth of his first child, which is expected in March. So now we have, very, very legitimate reason as to why Conor McGregor's belt was taken away. It was taken away because he hadn't defended it in a year, and he wasn't going to defend it at least until July. And obviously, people want to see him defend the lightweight belt kind of more so than they wanted to see him defend it at featherweight. There's more matchups available for him at lightweight than there would be at featherweight. What would he do? Fight Aldo again at 145? And it was more so because of the fact that he had a very hard time making the weight at featherweight. So Jose Aldo is once again the UFC featherweight champion. That victory over Frankie Edgar for the interim belt allowed him to be promoted as the UFC featherweight champion. That's completely okay by me. They put the interim belt on the line for a reason. The reason was the current champion wasn't defending it, so they had to create an interim belt so that way if Conor did decide to stay in 155, they would have a champion in that weight class. That was the purpose of the title. So Max Holloway and Anthony Pettis will now fight for the interim belt, and that's one of the things that gets kind of confusing. I don't really know why they made an interim belt for this fight. I think they did it just to make it exciting, try to sell more pay-per-views. That's really the only thing I can think of in terms of why they would make it an interim fight. I don't think, that was necessary. The only reason why I think they did make it an interim fight is maybe due to the fact that Jose Aldo had some battles with the UFC. Maybe they won't be able to trust Jose Aldo as the UFC featherweight champion going forward, because when he was the featherweight champion, one of the biggest knocks on him back then was that he would never go straight through a fight. He'd always pull out of one at least once a year. So, if that were to happen, then they would cut the cord and say, you know what, you're not game to defend this title in the fashion that we want you to. So you're stripped. They could do that. Really, these two guys, Max Holloway is on a 9-fight win streak. His last loss was against Conor McGregor 3 years ago, back in 2013. And Anthony Pettis is a former UFC lightweight champion. The belt that he once held is the belt that Conor now holds. So Anthony Pettis kind of deserves this opportunity. Max Holloway deserves this opportunity to carry a belt, even though it's an interim title belt. It does mean something going forward, because that fighter would either be fighting Jose Aldo, or if Jose Aldo causes the UFC problems like he has in years past, then that fighter would then be promoted. So an interim title fight does mean something, because in situations like this, you never know what could happen in the future that could cause the interim title fight winner to then be promoted as the UFC champion. So I'm very excited for this fight. Even though Daniel Cormier got knocked out of the fight with Anthony Johnson and all that stuff happened, with the knee injury and the groin injury, I think that this is a very good fight for a main event of a UFC pay-per-view. I think this fight matters because this is a cornerstone fight for Anthony Pettis. This is a cornerstone fight for Max Holloway. This is a huge fight, the biggest fight in both of their careers. And that says a lot in terms of Anthony Pettis, because he actually won a belt that wasn't an interim belt before at lightweight, as I mentioned earlier. So why do I think this is the biggest fight for both men? Obviously Max Holloway is on a 9-fight win streak. He's fought the who's who, did what he needed to do at featherweight in order to get this opportunity, and they put him in there with Anthony Pettis. If he gets through Anthony Pettis, he'll then be fighting Jose Aldo or be promoted as a champ. So this is like do or die for Max Holloway. It's do or die for Anthony Pettis as well, because if he loses this fight, it would be his second fight at featherweight. He had a skid recently at lightweight which was why he moved down to featherweight in general. So this is going to be a very interesting fight, and I really don't know how to predict it, but I am going to go with my gut and go with the more experienced guy in big fights, and I'm going to go with Anthony Pettis for that reason. I think experience is huge in terms of mixed martial arts and cage generalship. I think that's going to matter in this fight. Anthony Pettis has fought a lot of big fights in both the UFC and the WEC. He's fought on the grandest stages and the grandest arenas, best arenas in the world in mixed martial arts. He's fought in Japan. He's fought in front of 40,000 people. And I think that does matter in a fight of this magnitude. And I think that it's something that Anthony Pettis kind of knows that he has that advantage over Max Holloway. He'll bring that advantage with him into the octagon. He looked very good in his featherweight debut over Charles Oliveira. He choked out Charles Oliveira, who was a submission artist. So I think that this might be one of those matchups. Wrong matchup, wrong time for Max Holloway. I'm not going to say Max Holloway is going to get completely destroyed. I think it's going to be a barn burner regardless. But I think over the course of the fight, Anthony Pettis' experience will help him win versus Max Holloway. The one dynamic, though, obviously, that does trouble me with Anthony Pettis is the weight cut. The weight cut from lightweight to featherweight. I'm wondering if he's had some issues with that. They haven't said that he has, but it's obviously a difference, a change of pace for the human body to be cutting more weight than you never have, than what you haven't before. He's never cut this much weight to fight, so he's only done it once. So he's not as an experienced featherweight as Max Holloway is, and Max Holloway is only fighting at featherweight because that's his actual size. He's actually 25 years old, so he's going to be growing into his body. He'll probably end up at welterweight at the end of his career due to the fact that he's not fully grown into his body yet, and the fact that he's flawless at that weight. And Anthony Pettis is more so going down to featherweight as an experiment towards being one of the, probably being the fourth guy now to win 2 belts in 2 different weight classes, joining Randy Couture, BJ Penn, Conor McGregor, and then Anthony Pettis would be the 4th guy. So he's got his own ulterior motive, so to speak, to win this fight, and I'm very excited for it. I think this is going to be a really awesome fight. This is why the UFC is the best mixed martial arts organization in the world, because guys can fall out of fights, guys can get hurt, and then they can come up with a really good option for a main event. Maybe that was a co-main event on the card, promote that, and make it into and sell it. They can sell any fight under any situation very, very well. They can build fighters, build stars, creating stars constantly. That's why the UFC turned into a $4 billion enterprise, and I'm very excited for this fight. Also, the co-main event, you got Donald Cerrone versus Matt Brown. I'm going to go with Cerrone on this one. Matt Brown showed shades of greatness for a little while, but I think Cerrone, again, is a little bit more experienced than Matt Brown in the big fight category. And Donald Cerrone at 170 is a lot different than the Donald Cerrone at 155. So I'm going to go with Cerrone. So my picks, Pettis and Cerrone for these fights. And it's crazy because Anthony Pettis and Donald Cerrone fought each other at 155. Now Anthony Pettis is at featherweight at 145. Donald Cerrone is at 170 after fighting at 155. So it's crazy how many fighters play with their weight. What do they do to try to gain an advantage? Donald Cerrone felt like he was cutting too much weight. It made him weaker, so he bulked up and got stronger. Anthony Pettis felt like he was being overmatched as a smaller lightweight, so he moved down to featherweight to try to use his speed advantage on fighters at featherweight. So very interesting stuff for UFC 206. I'm very excited for it. I got Anthony Pettis and Donald Cerrone in the main and co-main event. Thanks for tuning into the Thomas Take Sports Podcast. Plenty more coming right up. So thank you. Thanks for tuning in.